بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على خير المرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم سبحانك اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. So continuing on, alhamdulillah, we've been going through the prayer for the last 2 weeks, and I think we probably have at least this week and next week still to go through the prayer, the longest section in the Al-Murshid al-Muin. We've been talking about the fard prayers up until now, the individual fards, but fard, the obligatory prayers, are divided into two types. There's those which are obligatory on the individual, which are the 5 daily prayers, and those which are obligatory on the Muslims as a whole, or the Muslims of a particular location, and that's the janaza prayer. Every Muslim has the right, if he dies Muslim, to be prayed over as a Muslim, with the exception of those who die fi sabilillah, fighting jihad as martyrs. They don't get washed or prayed over and are buried in their armor or their clothing. But apart from that, every other Muslim who lives and dies as a Muslim has the right to be prayed over. Right acting or wrong acting, regardless. So he says here, Faslun, section, وَخَمْسُ صَلَوَاتٍ فَرْضُ عَيْنٍ. The 5 daily prayers, and we talked about the 5 daily prayers last time and their times. The 5 daily prayers are a fard on the ayn, on the individual. وَهِيَ, and the prayer is, it is, kifayatun, a fard kifaya, literally enough, a fard that it is enough when some people do it and others don't. Limatin, for somebody who is deceased, duna main, without doubt. So here, the second type of fard here is the fard kifaya. Fard kifaya doesn't just apply to the prayer. There's lots of different types of fard kifaya, lots of things that if some of the Muslims do it, the rest of the Muslims don't have to. An example might be keeping knowledge alive. Not every single Muslim is required to become a faqih or a muhaddith or anything else. So long as some of the people, Muslims do that and keep it alive, it is enough. Health, looking after the health of people. That can also be considered to be a fard kifaya on the Muslims. Making sure that the Muslims have food, people doing farming and other things of that nature, if there's no other sources of food. Fard kifaya on the Muslims. But here, with respect to the prayer, the fard kifaya of the prayer is the janaza prayer. The janaza prayer is different in its form from other prayers. I'm sure pretty much everybody here has probably done at least one janaza prayer in their lives. Doesn't have all of the sajdas and the prostrations and the movements. Basically has 4 elements to it, 4 fard elements to it. First being standing up for it. You don't sit down, you stand for the prayer, and you remain standing throughout it. The second is, he says here, furuduha, its fard elements are at-takbiru arba'an, saying the takbir 4 times. The funeral prayer has, instead of 4 rak'ats, 4 takbirs. Each takbir basically takes the place of a rak'ah. The first of those takbirs is the takbir for entering into the prayer, takbiratul ihram. And then each other one almost represents a rak'at as you go through. That's an obligation. For the first one, you raise your hands, and you don't raise your hands again for all of them. For us, after the first one, we raise our hand, Allahu Akbar, we keep our hands by our sides, and we stay in that position throughout the rest of the time. So that's the takbir. Every takbir has another fard element attached to it, and that's what should be done after each of these takbirs, except for the last one, of which it is optional, and that is dua. So the next obligation of the funeral prayer is dua. There's no particular wording that is emphasized with respect to dua. So long as you are doing dua for the deceased, that is enough to meet the obligation of dua. Dua must be done after every takbir apart from the last one. So it's a condition after every takbir. We don't have a Fatiha in this prayer as the people of Malik. You don't like to have this thing where you do the Fatiha after the first takbir, then salats on the Prophet ﷺ after the second takbir, then dua for the deceased after the third, and then dua for everybody else after the last. No. Dua for the deceased is the main part of this prayer. There is no Fatiha in this prayer with Malik. Whether you say praise on Allah and salawat on the Prophet ﷺ is something that's connected to dua. When you make dua, it is generally recommended that you always start with thana, with praise of Allah, and that you always start with salawat on the Prophet ﷺ. So you would do that, you would include that maybe in the beginning, but you would not fill the entire first space after the first takbir with just that and not make dua. You have to try and focus on making dua for the deceased with whatever words you can. I mean, Allah have mercy on him, Allah yarhamhu, or Allahumma ghfirhu. You don't have to do any particular memorization. Just if you keep on saying those types of things, that's enough. So furuduha takbiru arba'an du'a wa niyatun. The niyyah is a prayer. It's an act of worship. Every prayer must have an obligation, must have an intention. Your intention here should be for whoever is in front of you. If you don't know who is in front of you, you don't know whether, for example, even if it's a man or a woman or anything, if you make the intention to do the dua and you sort of say it as if you're making dua for a man and it's a woman, or you make dua as if it's a woman and it's a man, it doesn't have any effect. You know that you're doing a janaza for whoever this deceased person is in front of you. The other thing is, when you do the janaza prayer, when you do this prayer, where do you do it? There's no, it can be done. It can be done anywhere. There's a pure ground where people gather. It doesn't have to be the graveyard. Imam Malik disliked bodies to be brought into the mosque, even though no body is actually impure. But he disliked it to be brought in the mosque because impure things do come out of bodies. So he disliked the bodies to be brought into the mosque. But if there was a little niche in front that was not strictly speaking part of the mosque and people would do the prayer in the mosque, he saw no dislike in that. The body has to be present when you do the janaza. We don't have janaza ghaib, or the sort of the ghaib prayer that's that, for example, when Shaykh al-Qardawi rahimahullah died, you had lots of people in this country doing salat al-ghaibah for him, the funeral prayer in absentia. And that's one of the things in some of the other madhabs, but not with Imam Malik, because Imam Malik saw when the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did the funeral prayer for the Najashi, the Negus, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala folded up space for him so that the Messenger of Allah saw the Najashi in front of him. And that's a khasisa, a special thing that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was given. And it's not for everybody. So generally speaking, it's not permitted to have, well, more than generally speaking, is there's no permission that's granted for Salat al-Ghaiba within the Maliki school. And there are other proof ones that none of the Sahaba after this time that the Najashi died did it. No matter when any of the great Sahabis died in other places, they didn't do it in their localities for them. So that's the proof that we have. So the body has to be present. If it's a male body, you stand in the middle of the body, and the head should be on the right, whether it's on his back or facing towards the Qibla. And if it's a female, you stand by the shoulders, with the head on the right. If there's lots of people, you have an option. If lots of people have died, such as, for example, in the earthquake, when you have a lot of people who've died and you have to do lots of janazas at the same time, you have two options. Either you do lots and lots of janaza prayers and they're brought in one after the other, or you line up the bodies and you do all the janaza all at once or in big groups. So if you do that, you either stack the bodies in a line, the same as the prayer lines, feet to head going along with the best of the people in the middle, and then the next best on the right, and the next best on the left, and the next best on the right, sort of going out like that, if you know who's best. If you don't, you just stack everybody, as long as they're all men. If it's males and females, you have to do the other way, where you have the male, maybe the best of them, closest to the imam, and then after him, in a line going towards the Qibla, all of them facing, with their heads to the right. You have each of the bodies stacked in that way. Depends also on the place, whether it's possible to do either of those things. So you have those two methods of lining up the bodies, but they have to be present. Salam. So the final obligation of the funeral prayer is the salam. Just as the takbir enters the prayer, and it is a prayer, it is a state of an inviolable state that you entered, where certain things are forbidden for you. In order to exit that state, you always need to say the salam. For the funeral prayer, it's simply saying, Assalamu alaikum. The Imam says it out loud, but not very out loud, because it's disliked in the presence of those who are dead to raise your voices, hugely. So you would say it so the people who are in the first rows will be able to hear, but not necessarily if you've got like 100 rows that you have to say it really loudly so that everybody can hear. So you say Assalamu alaikum, and then those who are behind the Imam say it silently, but maybe just enough that the person next to them hears. There's no return of the salam here. There's one for everybody. Doesn't matter if there's somebody on your left. Doesn't matter that there's an Imam in front of you. Assalamu alaikum. No, wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. That's it. That's how the funeral prayer is done. The final takbir, you have the option of either doing dua or simply pausing for a millisecond or a short while and then doing the salam straight after it. That's the general form of this prayer. So he says, furuduhu takbir, its fard elements are the takbir, arba and 4, dua, supplication, wa niyya, intention, salamu sirrin, salam that is silent. And as I said, for the Imam, it's not absolutely silent. Generally speaking, as we mentioned before, if you're doing any prayer, especially the fard prayers, when you say Assalamu alaikum, even if you're behind the Imam, you say it out loud. It's a general rule of prayers for this salam. Because obviously it needs to be allowed for somebody to then return the salam to you, but not here. This is the one exception because there is no return of the salam anyway for this prayer. Tabi'ah, following on. So these are the obligations of the prayer. As I said, qiyam he doesn't mention, but qiyam is one of them, standing for this prayer if you have the capacity to stand. By the way, there's also another thing. The janaza prayer is only prayed over those who are known to have lived, and those who are, also they die a Muslim. If somebody leaves Islam and it's known for a fact, if there's doubt about it, you would do the prayer over them. Somebody leaves Islam, obviously they no longer have the janaza prayed if it's a public knowledge thing. The person who leads the janaza prayer should be the wasi, the person who is appointed by the dead person. So if you make a will when you die, in your will, you might say, for example, if you've got young children, I want so-and-so to look after their needs and to look after their wealth on their behalf. If you're going to die, you say, I want so-and-so to make sure that all my needs are met in terms of buying my kafan and all these various things. But also part of this is that you appoint somebody to lead your funeral prayer. Some people say, I want so-and-so to do the janaza for me. That's perfectly fine. And that person takes precedence. If you die without doing that, you haven't appointed anybody, who takes precedence? Who do you think?
No person who's local best.
No, basically, this is different from some other things. Here, the Khalifa of the Muslims takes precedence. Obviously, we're not in a situation where we have a Khalifa currently. So it will be his representatives who are the imams leading the khutbah. That's a condition. For them to take precedence over the family, they have to be appointed by the leader or the leader, and also doing the khutbah if they're a local leader and leading prayers. That person takes precedence over any family member. Only after that person goes to the family. The person who takes precedence in the family is the son or the grandson or the great-grandson, whoever it is, who's below him in sort of being sprung from his loins, so long as they are obviously adult and mukallaf. If they don't exist, then it goes to the father. If they don't exist, then it goes to a full brother. Then it goes to a full uncle, paternal uncle on the father's side, and half brothers, then grandfather, and so on and so forth. So it goes in the same sort of order as you might do with inheritance, basically. It goes out in that particular way. It's a group prayer. So you also require to have an imam. Even if somebody's praying alone, they almost pray it as a group prayer, the janaza prayer. If you have a child and that child is stillborn, or you miscarry. Some people are tempted to have whole funerals in those situations, but we don't. If a child is stillborn, even though it can be very traumatic for the mother. I think we had a case like this in of some people in Germany fairly recently, of the Muslims there, that they had a janaza and stuff. But you're not meant to have a janaza for stillborn. You don't have the prayer and you don't do the ghusl for them, because they're not considered to have lived, and they don't inherit or are inherited from, and lots of other conditions. So this is why you need witnesses for some at birth, and why the testimony of women is accepted in those circumstances. Because how do you know if a child is born whether it made a noise or not? That makes a difference for the funeral. That makes a difference for inheritance, and so on and so forth. Because the moment that child is born and alive, it inherits. Then if it dies after that, then there are others who inherit from that child, separate from. But it all depends on who's died in various times, how it all works out. If you place the body the wrong way around, inadvertently the head is facing on the left and the feet are on the right, the prayer is valid, just fine. If you pray in the wrong direction, by mistake again, then the prayer is valid, although it's recommended, if you find that out before the body is buried, to do it again. No. What about if you arrive late for the funeral prayer? Basically, if you arrive and the imam you say Allahu Akbar and the imam says salam, before you say the salam, you should make all the takbirs up to make sure you catch them up. Because it's 4 takbirs, so you're making it up by simply doing 4 takbirs.
So you
just do them quickly afterwards. Even though you've missed some of the dua, there will be some element of the dua as you join. Yeah. And another thing, there is no harm in doing a funeral prayer at night. Some people think that it is disliked to do it at night, but Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was buried at night. Sayyidatina Fatima radiallahu anha and Sayyidatina Aisha radiallahu anha, the al-Muin, was buried in the night. Mm. So there's no harm in, and the funeral prayer was done for them in the night. So there's no harm in that. So this is the first one that he relates here, and that's the prayer. But there are other fard kifayas when it comes to janaza that are also obligatory on us as a whole, and not obligatory as individuals. And he says, وَكَالصَّلَاةِ, in the same way as the prayer, in other words, being a fard on us as a whole, that if some of us do us, the rest of us no longer have to. Al-ghuslu, washing the body, doing the ghusl for the body. So this is one of the things that we do as Muslims that many others don't do. It singles us out. I think they've got a good impression of us in the local funeral parlors here because we do this particular thing. But when a person dies as a Muslim and they have not died fighting in the way of Allah, then they are before they are put in the ground, they are fully purified. They are given a ghusl to remove all impurities. The first thing that is done is any impurity of the body is removed. So you press gently on the stomach so that anything that's impure might come out. Then you wash the private areas. The person who should be doing this washing, by the way, it's recommended that it be the spouse, first and foremost. Okay. So if a husband dies, it's recommended that the wife can do it. If the wife dies, it's recommended that the husband do it. If they don't want to, sometimes they're very traumatized and they're not able to take that on, although there is healing in it. But if they are not able to do it, then it goes to the family, the close family members. So if it was a male who died, it would be the close male relatives. And if there are none of those, then after that, it will go to non-male, non-relative males, other males. For men should do the washing apart from the wife. For women should do the washing apart from the husband. That's the general rule. So if you go all the way that there are no, there's no men in the family who are close family. There's no other men who are able to do it outside of the family. There's no women in the family because they're the next in the line, such as the sister or mother or whatever, to do the washing. And if they do it, they should do it having a cloth between them and the body. If there is no one of that thing, then it goes to women who are not related, ajnabiyat as they're called, and they're not allowed to do ghusl. They have to do tayammum on the body. So they would do tayammum until the elbows. If it was a woman who died, then it would be the husband first. Then if he's not able to do it, or if he's not around, then it would be the close women, the daughter, the granddaughter, the mother, etc. If they're not able to do it, then it will go to other women. If they're not able to do it, then it will be males from her family. And again, they would do it through a cloth. And if they're not able to do it, then it would be males who are not related to them at all, and they could only do tayammum. And again, but their tayammum would only be until the wrists, because they're not allowed to see anything, not even the arms of the woman. They shouldn't be. All they're allowed to see is the hands and the face. So that's yeah.
Shaykh, had a question regarding doing the wudu, doing the ghusl for the dead. Is it the same procedure as well? And specifically, do they also have to do the rubbing as it's done in the Maliki madhab? Or
yeah, it's exactly the same as the ghusl for janaba, which involves obviously the pouring of water and rubbing the limbs. But you should put some sort of cloth on around the hand, especially you have to do it when you're touching the private parts. But if you are not closely related, like the husband or the wife, then you should do it. You shouldn't touch the body elsewhere if you could avoid it. If you can't avoid it, then you can't avoid it. But yeah, you do the same type of washing. As I said, you wash off the impurities first, then you do wudu in the same way as we would do wudu for a ghusl. And part of that wudu, you maybe put a cloth around some of your fingers and wipe the teeth. So you clean the teeth, wipe in the nostrils. When you put water into the mouth, you tilt the head so that the water doesn't stay in there. And then you do wudu as we would do. Then you do a ghusl perhaps with water, with things in the water that help clean. So, such as sidr, or such as some sort of soap sort of thing that cleans that body with the first ghusl. Then the second ghusl, you would just use pure water. And then the third ghusl, because it's recommended to do 3 ghusls, but you don't have to. The third ghusl, you would add some sort of scented thing like camphor or something to the water. And so to leave a nice scent on the body. And then after that, you would also do hanut, when after you've done the kafan, where you would put sort of perfumed things on the places of prostration and the places where negative scents bad smells might come out. So there's a whole process to it. But when you're wiping the private parts, you should wrap something around the hand, even if you are the husband or the wife. In fact, because some people say that if divorce breaks a marriage, surely death does as well. So but I mean, still, you were married. But still, you should avoid the nakedness ever being exposed when a ghusl is being done. The private areas should always be covered. Is there any questions about ghusl? By the way, something that also is disliked that some people do in the modern era is cut the hair and sort of, cut the beard and cut the nails and all that sort of thing. That's actually disliked at least in the madhab of Malik. I don't know about the other madhabs. You should leave the body with whatever is continue to grow on there as part of the body. And if you do cut them, then you should leave it with the body when the body's buried. Dafnun, so burial. This is also a fard. I mean, we have to make sure that the ghusl is done. Obviously, if there aren't the people to do the ghusl, you do tayammum instead. But we also have to make sure that a body is buried. This applies to bodies of people who've been killed or died on land. As for when they die on the sea, they are returned to the sea. Yeah. But on land, they are buried. And that applies even if there's only a little bit of them that remains. For example, if somebody's been eaten by a wild beast, you bury whatever you can find of them that remains. So the dafn, basically the way that we bury them, the best way is with a lahad, which is you basically dig the grave parallel to the qibla, or perpendicular to the qibla. So the qibla is that way and the grave is that way. The grave is left to right and the qibla will be straight. Then the body will be put into the grave facing forward. With that, so on its right-hand side, facing forward, in a little niche that is built into the qibla side of the wall. So you would dig out a little niche and put it there if the ground is hard enough. And then you would block off this niche with bricks or with planks or something else, so that the earth doesn't go straight on the body, and then you fill it up. That's the recommended way of doing it if the ground will allow it. But sometimes the ground is way too soft to do that. If you do that, the earth will just collapse onto the body. So what you do in that case is you dig a hole or a gap in the bottom, like a little gap, sort of right down the middle of the grave, and then you put them in that gap, and then you can cover over that then with planks. So but again, with facing towards the Qibla. If the space is too small to allow that, or you're burying them in a place that the only way you can do it is to bury them with the grave facing the Qibla, then you would put them on their back with their chin on their chest, with their feet facing towards the Qibla. You should make this grave deep enough that animals and others could not easily dig it up, but not sort of like excessively deep where you're digging halfway to Australia to bury them or anything like that. So we don't like excess in anything. So basically, the way they do it in here is probably fine, what's it, six foot down or whatever, because people have to get down into the grave and put the person there. The person who has most right to get into the grave is the spouse, so a wife or a husband. And then they may enlist the help of those who are close family members in the same order that we've mentioned before. Or they can even enlist the people of excellence, somebody who's known for his right acting nature, or somebody who is an imam or whatever it is. They can ask their help in these sorts of matters. Wakafan. Then the next one is what we know in English as shrouding. The word in English is curiously similar to coffin, the Arabic word kafan, but actually a coffin is disliked, a box. It's disliked to bury somebody in a box. The kafan is a shroud, or it's bits of cloth. And the recommendation is that you have a minimum of 3 or a maximum of 7. That's not, but in fact, they normally talk about 5. So you have one where you wrap around the head so it leaves a little bit of the face exposed, and there might be a bit of cloth that covers the face that can be moved backwards and forwards, but it sort of covers the head fully, wrapped around the head. Another that you wrap around the waist, between the knees and the belly button, like you on Hajj, like the bottom part of the Hajj garment. And another one you wrap around the upper part, like a shirt that completely goes around it, similar to the Hajj one, but goes around the body more. And then you have 2 more that you sort of wrap around like a wrap around the body to fully cover it. You wrap every bit. And then the body is placed in the grave with that. And then, as I said, you put the planks and things on over it, but not touching it. If you don't have the means to pay for the kafan yourself, you can't put it, because it's the first thing that's taken out. The costs of burying and the costs of kafan are the first thing that's taken out of a person's estate when they die. If they don't have the means for it, then it becomes incumbent upon those who would inherit from him to pay for it. If they don't have the means, then it becomes inherent on the Bayt al-Mal to cover this cost. They don't have enough cloths. They're only required to give 3, though, when it's a requirement. And if they are a bit shahi, they're a bit sort of miserly, that's it, they give 3, but their minimum is 3. It's recommended that they give more than that. Okay, so that's enough with the janaza. Are there any questions relating to the janaza? Oh, there's also the other things that we have relating to this, the walking in accompanying the body, which is a recommendation, and it's recommended to walk in front of the body, but it's fine to walk behind it, especially when the body is in a car in the modern era. Or if you are in a car or on a horse yourself, you should be behind. And it's recommended that the men and the women are separate when this is done. So the men are ahead and the women will be behind. Visiting the grave is fine, and it's actually recommended because it reminds you of death. That applies to men and women. The only time women are barred from going to visit the graves is when they wail, because of that wailing thing that certain women used to have in the time of the Prophet _. They would make a very, very loud sort of crying sound that really was very distressing for the dead and very off-putting. So it was disliked for them to attend. It's recommended when you're putting the body in the grave and doing anything else, even after the body is in the grave, to remind the person in there of saying the shahadatain, to make dua for them. That's especially the case if somebody is dying, that you turn them to face the qibla, you remind them of the shahad, to say the shahadatain, you recite lots of Quran and dua in their presence, and so on and so forth. But there's lots of things connected to this. There's a whole literature relating around what we do with the dead. So we're going through the number of now the non-obligatory prayers. So we can divide the prayer into what is obligatory and what is non-obligatory, which they use the word nafila here, which we could say is recommended. There's lots of different categories of nafila. Nafila ranges all the way from sunnah mu'akkada, a strongly emphasized sunnah, right down to something which is just above okay to do, but still, there's still reward for doing it, but there's no emphasis at all on doing it. The most emphasized of all the sunnah prayers, witr. Yeah. So he says witrun. The salatul witr is for us a single rakat. One rakat. That is the last rakat that you should pray in your day. Its time is after you have prayed Isha, so long as you are also after the time of Isha. So if you are traveling and you bring your Isha forward to join with your Maghrib, you can't pray your witr then. You can only pray it once the true time of Isha has started, which is when the redness has left the sky. So witr can't be brought forward. Witr is one of the few non-fard prayers that can be made up outside of its time. It's so strongly emphasized, in fact, that some of the schools, I think the Hanafis, say that it's wajib, and that if you don't pray witr, you're somebody whose testimony cannot be accepted. It means that you're not a right-acting man or a right-acting woman. So it's a very important prayer. If you are at the end of the time of just before sunrise, and you only have a short time left, and you haven't prayed subh or witr or fajr, if you have enough time to pray 2 rakats before the sun rises, you pray your witr, and then 1 rakat of subh. It's above the fajr. It's above even 1 rakat of subh in that case, to make sure you get it. If you come if you remember while you're praying Isha that you haven't, while you're praying subh that you haven't prayed witr, you can break it off and pray your witr. Because once you've prayed subh, you no longer can make it up. It's a very, very strongly emphasized prayer, the witr. And as I said, it's only a single raka'at. There's another 2 prayers that he's going to mention later, which is called the shafa', which are the 2 rakats that precede it, because the Hanafis have witr as 3 rakats.
Yeah.
We divide it up into the shafa', which is, some say only nafila, but some also say it's sunnah, and the witr, which is strongly emphasized sunnah. So if you're running short on time, you can just do the 1 rakat. It should be done, by the way, before you go to sleep if you're somebody who struggles to get up and you're never sure that you're going to get up, or at the end of the night if you're pretty much guaranteed that you're going to get up in the night. Should be the last prayer that you do. If you pray it early in the night and then you wake up and you want to do more prayers, you don't repeat it. You just continue to do even rakats.
I also heard this from you want extra prayers, you do the shafi, and then you do the extra prayers and then you finish it with the witr.
No, the shafi should be connected to the witr.
Okay, all right.
So if you're going to do extra prayers, you do them before you do the shafa.
Okay.
So that's the first one. Witr, are there any questions about that? The next one is Salatul Kusuf, which is the solar eclipse prayer. It's a very rare prayer. We don't have very many solar eclipses. Solar eclipses can take quite a long time to finish. It can be a very slow process where even with a little bit of shadow over the sun, and it's hours until the shadow is completely gone from the sun. You should, with the solar eclipse, go to the mosque establish a jama'ah prayer in the mosque, everybody praying together, not being out there going to watch the eclipse, but all going to the mosque to do this solar eclipse prayer. It's a bit different to the other prayers because it has 2 ruku's in every rak'ah. And also it's different in the length of time you spend in all the positions.
Down again.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's another emphasized sunnah on the group.
Yeah.
Actually on the individual here. You basically go, the form that's mentioned in the books of fiqh is in the first standing of the first rakat, you do Surah Al-Baqarah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Then you go into ruku'.
Yeah.
And you stay in ruku' for as long as it takes to do Surah Al-Baqarah.
Oh, my God.
Then you stand up. Oh, you do the Fatiha, obviously, in Surah Al-Baqarah.
Yeah.
Then you stand up. Then after saying Sami Allahu liman hamida rabbana wa lakal hamd, then you do the Fatiha again, and you do Surah Al Imran.
Mhm.
Yeah. Then you go into ruku' again for the same sort of length of time. Then you stand up, Sami Allahu liman hamida rabbana wa lakal hamd, just a normal length of this time. Then you go into sajda. Spend a similar length of time in sajda, maybe slightly less than you were in ruku'. Then you sit up, no length of time, you're just short sitting. Then you go into second sajda, a similar length of time to the previous one, maybe slightly less. Then you stand up for the second rak'ah, and you do Surah An-Nisa. This is obviously the longest version of it.
Yeah.
Then you go into ruku' for as long as it takes to do Surah An-Nisa. Then you stand up again, Sami Allahu liman hamida, and you do Surah Al-Ma'idah, followed by the Fatiha, obviously, then Ma'idah. Then ruku' for the similar length of time. Then Sami Allahu liman hamida rabbana wa lakal hamd. Then don't spend any time there. Then you go down into sajda, and in the same format, you spend a long time in sajda, then sit, then a long time in sajda, and then say the salam. Obviously, if the solar eclipse has finished when you're only halfway through the first rakat, then you would stop doing it at that speed.
Okay.
Then you would, do the rest of it at a normal speed, rather than spending such a long time. Because the whole point is that you're praying for the duration of the eclipse. So if the eclipse finishes and you're halfway through Baqarah, then you would obviously change the format somewhat, but you would still have 2 ruku's and 2 ruku's in every rak'ah. Then you have the other type of eclipse, which is a lunar eclipse, which is called khusuf, although the 2 words can be said to be interchangeable. And the lunar eclipse is different in that it lasts a lot less time, and it's a lot sort of less of a considered to be a lot less traumatic event in some ways. You don't need to go to the mosque for this one. You can stay at home, or you could go to the mosque, but you pray it individually. So even if everybody congregates in the mosque when it's happening, they all pray individually, and you just do it the same way as you would do any other nafilah prayer, and you keep on doing it until it's finished. So you do 2 rakats, then 2 rakats, then 2 rakats till it's finished. Then it's Salat al-Eid. We're not getting through very many lines here because these things just have one word that has huge explanations for them. Salat al-Eid, obviously there's 2 Eid prayers. And the Eid prayer is like the Jummah prayer, it has a khutbah. But the khutbah in the Eid prayer is after you have done you do the prayer first and then the khutbah. Not like the Jummah where you do the khutbah and then the prayer. The Eid prayer has 7 takbirs in the first rakat, and then 6 takbirs in the second rakat if you include the takbir of standing up. It's recommended that you pray it in a prayer ground rather than in the mosque, if you have such a place. That when you're going out to it, you go out by one path and come back by another. That the prayer is done in the early morning, but sufficiently after sunrise that it's permissible to do. Basically, I don't think we've talked about this yet, but there are times when it's disliked and there are times that it's forbidden to do nafilah prayers.
Okay.
The time when it's forbidden to do nafilah prayers is at the moment of sunrise, as the sun is touching the horizon, and at the moment of sunset, as the sun is touching the horizon, and when the imam is delivering the khutbah. Those are the 3 times that it is forbidden to do a nafilah prayer. Well, with our madhab, obviously, some people consider the tahiyatul masjid wajib, which we don't. But anyway, and then there are times where it's disliked to do nafilah prayers, and that is between the prayer of Asr and the prayer of Maghrib. not the time of Asr, because obviously the time of Asr starts and then you do 2 rak'ats before you pray Asr. So it's not between the time of Asr and the time of Maghrib. Between the prayer of Asr and the prayer of Maghrib, it's disliked to do any nafila prayers. And from the time you pray Subh until a qadr al-rumh, what they say is the length of a spear, when the sun is the length of a spear above the horizon after sunrise, which is maybe around 20 minutes or so. Exactly how they work out with this spear or how far it's held away, Allah knows best. Yeah. But it's been calculated around 20 minutes. That's disliked to do any prayers, nafila prayers in that time. So things like the Eid prayer, things like the istisqa prayer that we're going to come to, the rain prayer, things like the kusuf prayer, they should all be prayed in the morning. That's the best time for these prayers, but only after that point. So it will be disliked to pray the prayer of Eid before that point.
How long between the sun being at the side of the spear
Until midday.
Oh, okay.
Until the sun reaches its zenith. All of that is viable time for the Eid prayer and these other types of prayers.
Oh, okay.
Also, it's recommended that you don't leave your home until after the sun has risen. But that depends obviously how far away you live. If you live a long way away, you may have to leave earlier if you're going to be walking, because it's recommended to walk if you can. It's recommended for the Eid of Ramadan, at the end of Ramadan, the Fitr, Eid al-Fitr, that you break your fast before going to the Eid prayer. And for the Eid al-Hajj, the Eid al-Adha, that you are fasting until you come to the Eid prayer. You don't eat from Fajr until that time. It's also recommended that you do a ghusl for both, strongly recommended. Some make it at the level of a sunnah that you do a ghusl for both of these Eid prayers. They are both also accompanied by a khutbah. And this khutbah, as I said, should happen after the prayer. By the way, another thing that a lot of people do, you hear Salat al-Jami' yarhamukumullah whenever people are gathering for Eid prayer and things like that, because there's no adhan and no iqamah. But in fact, the stronger position in the Maliki madhab is you don't even say that. Okay. The fact of the imam appearing is enough to get people to stop saying the takbirs, which is recommended that they say throughout their time walking to the mosque and while they're in the prayer ground until the imam comes. But him coming should be the moment that they stand up to pray, so that's stopping the takbirs and then standing. You don't need to say Salat al-Jami' for that. But obviously in the modern era, whatever makes it easier for people, because there is a position, I think Qadiyad held that it was all right to do that. You take that, even though it might not be in the complete mashhur of the madhab.
Mm.
The khutbah should have lots of takbirs in it. Should start the first khutbah with 7 takbirs. You can emulate the prayer with the second one starting with the 5 takbirs, excluding the one for standing up. And then you throw in takbirs. People can respond with the takbirs as well. It's a way of showing your joy, showing your pride of being Muslim, your happiness at receiving this gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As we're going to come to the next one, it's the opposite. Istisqa. When you go to the Eid, you wear your best clothes, you put on your best perfume, you have a ghusl, you do all of these types of things. You make yourself as beautiful as possible. Mm. For the istisqa, the rain prayer, you wear rags or you wear your worst clothes. You're not, puffed up chest walking out saying Allahu Akbar as you're going to the mosque. The opposite, you're sort of, subdued, saying istighfar on your way on your way there. So it's sort of got lots of things that are the same, or lots of things that are different. For the rain prayer, you also go to a prayer ground rather than doing it in the mosque. Mm. Although you can do it in the mosque, it's not forbidden. Mm. By the way, when you go to a prayer ground as well, just for the Eid prayer or for the istisqa, there's no tahiyatul masjid for a prayer ground. You don't go there and you immediately do 2 rakats because you're standing there. In fact, it's disliked with us to do that. You're meant to that's not part of it. That's something that's reserved for the houses of Allah, because they are something that has something above all of the other houses. This is not a house of Allah. It doesn't have a right to a tahiyatul masjid. Otherwise, why didn't you just go home and do a tahiyatul bayt whenever you go there? It's not a mosque. And also afterwards, it's not recommended to do either, because it's a time of people getting together. So the istisqa is very similar, except instead of takbirs, you focus on asking for forgiveness and dua. Mm. Basically, it's the same sort of format. Both of these ones, you do the recitation out loud, even though they're day prayers, the Eid and the Istisqa, and the Khusuf that we mentioned before, the Kusuf. Because the general rule is that daytime nafila prayers are silent, nighttime nafila prayers are out loud. That's the general rule. But these group daytime nafila prayers are done out loud. So anyway, you go there with the Salat al-Istisqa. That's when there's a drought. There's a desperate need for rain. The ruler of the region would call for people to come, and then people would maybe fast for the 3 days leading up to it and give lots of sadaqah in order that their du'as are going to be accepted. Then they would go out to the rain prayer in absolute humility, wearing a cloak that's easy for them to turn around when the time comes. And then the Imam would do the prayer with them, similar to how you do the prayer for the Eid, but no takbirs. Then he would give a khutbah. In the khutbah, he would call on people to make tawbah, call on people to make right the wrongs that they've done, and so on. And then at the end of this khutbah, he turns around to face the qibla, the Imam. Everyone else is still standing. And he turns around his cloak. So he reverses it, not upside down, but goes from inside out. And then raises his hands in impassioned dua for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring the rain and to ease the difficulties of all the crops and all those types of things. And everybody else who's sitting behind him also reverse their garments, but stay seated. That's the basic sort of pattern of the Salat al-Istisqa. By the way, both these khutbahs for the Eid and for the Istisqa are the same as the Jumu'ah. They're made up of 2 khutbahs with sitting in the middle, the same way. So he says here, Watrun, Kusufun, Eidun, Istisqa, Sunan. All of these are Sunnah prayers, Sunan. Fajrun, when we come to Salat al-Fajr, this can be confusing for some people because a lot of people refer to Subh as Fajr. But generally speaking, in the books of the Malikiyya, they separate them, and the Fard prayer is called Subh, although sometimes also, even in the books of the Malikiyya, it's called Fajr occasionally. And the non-Fard prayer at that time is called Fajr. This is the 2 khafifa, the 2 light rak'ats that you do after the sun has dawned, after the time of dawn has started, but before you pray the Subh. And they're called a raghiba here, which is sort of like asked of you, but not as strong as a sunnah, not as low as a nafila, even though all of these things are strong. The Fajr is considered to be a raghiba, but it is a special prayer. In the way that it's done, it's only done with the Fatiha. Pretty much the only prayer that's only the Fatiha. Done quite quickly. You don't do it, you don't linger when you're doing, you don't do Fatiha like super slowly. You do Fatiha, at a normal speed that you might do it, because, the Messenger of Allah was thought, Sayyidatina Aisha radiallahu anha thought that he could only have done the Fatiha. He did it so quickly. It's a very important prayer that you should always make sure that you're doing before you do the Subh. So even if you come to the mosque and you find the Imam having started the Subh, or you hear the Iqamah for it, if you know he's a slow Imam, then you quickly go out into the foyer, do your Fajr, and then come back, and so long as you know you're going to catch the rak'ah. So even if you heard the Iqamah, which means that no other prayer is allowed, in this case it's allowed, especially if you're outside the mosque when you hear the Iqamah, to do the Fajr first, even though the Iqamah actually means no other prayer is valid anymore. But there's a special case with the Fajr. If you do it at home, which you don't know if the Imam will already have started the Subh by the time you come, and then you come and there's plenty of time left, you can do other rakats after it, like Tahiyatul Masjid and stuff, but you don't repeat your Fajr. You've done it. If you come and you actually realize there's no chance of you doing the Fajr and still catching the prayer, then you join the prayer of the Imam, and then Fajr is unique in that you're allowed to make it up. These 2 rakats.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't make it up after praying Subh, because that period of time is a time when it's disliked to pray nawafil prayers, until that time that I've talked about, the qadr rumh, like where the sun is a spear's length above the horizon. But then from that moment until dhuhr, you can make up your Fajr. Yeah. Which is why if you are in a situation where you haven't prayed witr, you haven't prayed Fajr, and you haven't prayed Subh, the order of priority is subh, then witr, then fajr, because you can make up fajr later. وَتُقْضَى, so he says here, فَجْرٌ رَغِيبَةٌ, fajr is a raghiba, is something that's desired of you. وَتُقْضَى, and it is made up, لِلزَّوَالِ. So now he's talked about making up prayers. He hasn't talked about making up the Fajr prayers yet. So he thought, oh, I haven't talked about that. So he says here, oh, we're talking about making up prayers. وَالْفَرْضُ يُقْضَى أَبَدًا. But obligatory prayers, he says, are made up forever. So Fajr you can only make up until the zenith. If you delay it until after that, it's too late. But if you miss a Fajr prayer and you remember it from 40 years ago, you make it up.
Does that have to be done right?
Now, when you make this up, well, he says here, first let's finish what he says here. Well, fardu yuqda abadan, fard prayers are made up forever, wa bitawal, and in their order, one after the other. If the number of fard prayers that you remember is 5 or less, like a full day's prayer or less, you remember one prayer, you remember a couple of prayers that you didn't do, they are obligatory on you in the moment that you remember them. Even if you're in another prayer, they are obligatory on you in that moment. There's certain things we're going to come to. If you remember them in another prayer, depends whether you're imam or whether you're praying on your own, or whether you're praying behind an imam, exactly what you do in that circumstance. Or maybe I'll mention it here while we're here. If you're an imam, you have to cut off your prayer immediately because your prayer is invalid.
Oh, well.
If you are praying on your own, then it depends how many rakats you've prayed. And you turn that prayer that you're praying into a nafilah prayer. So you should make sure you've prayed an even number of rakats. If you're in your first rakat and you haven't completed one, you cut off your prayer. If you completed one rakat, then you add another one, make it 2, cut it off. And it depends, always you'll either do 2 or you do 4, depending on where you are from that point, or none. If you are praying behind an imam, this is one of the situations that's called you're a masjoon of the imam. You're imprisoned by the imam. Basically, your prayer is invalid, but you're not allowed to leave.
Okay. Then you have to make up the prayer.
You have to make it up, and you have to make up the prayer that you're in. So you're in the prayer, but you're not allowed to leave because of the possibility of this creating fitna and other things. Mm-hmm. So your prayer is invalid by you remembering the other prayer, but you're not going to disrespect the imam by going. Another situation to that is when you, for example, laugh out loud in the prayer. You remember something funny and you're not allowed to leave.
Okay.
If you're behind an imam. If the imam does that, that's it, prayer done. He has to leave. But if you're behind an imam, you're imprisoned by the imam. And similarly, if you join the prayer of the imam and he's in the final rakat and you thought you were joining like the third rakat and he's actually in the fourth, you haven't got any of the prayer with the imam. You have to make up the full prayer, but you're not allowed to leave. Once you're in, you're in. You can't say, oh my God, I haven't caught it. I think I'll just go to the side and do my own prayer. No, you're stuck. You're imprisoned by the imam. So the imam can imprison you, but he can also carry things for you, as we're going to come to. So if you remember, say, a dhuhr from yesterday, then you have, and it depends when you remember it. If you are in the time of dhuhr now, depends whether you've prayed that prayer or not. If you've prayed dhuhr, then you do the other dhuhr and then you repeat the dhuhr of today in order for the order to be met. But it's not obligatory so long as there's enough time. If you remember in the dhuhr, you cut off the dhuhr you're praying and you pray the dhuhr that you missed, even if that means that today's dhuhr is going to be outside of its time as a result. If it's before the prayer, it's clear. You do the one that you remember first because it's obligatory in the moment that you remember it. And the today's one, you leave until you finish that one. Is that clear? Or is it not?
It's clear.
Get your head around it. If you are in, if you're doing dhuhr and asr, for example, and you pray asr first, and then you remember you haven't prayed dhuhr, you have to pray dhuhr and asr, even after the time, because those two prayers share a time. If you remember that you weren't in, you were in janaza, you were in a state of janaba, and you prayed a whole bunch of prayers in janaba, And then you remember, oh my God, those 2 days of prayers or whatever it was, the wudu didn't mean anything because I was in Janaba. So you now got 2 days of prayers to make up, for example. You don't have to do them immediately. You can do them bit by bit. You should do them as quickly as you can, but they're not obligatory in the moment such that if you remember them in a prayer, that prayer is invalidated, or that you have to do those prayers before you do the current prayers, because they're considered to be a considerable lot. Somebody, for example, may have left the Deen for a bit in his youth, born Muslim, and decided not to bother practicing for a year or two, as a couple of years of. Well, you have some people who realize that something made their prayer not strictly valid, and they're quite strict about it. I met one guy who studied in Mauritania, and he used to always wipe over socks. And then he found out that you're not allowed to wipe over socks. You have to wipe over leather. And he was being very strict in holding to the Maliki position in this, even though actually that's a dominant position across the board, that thin cotton socks nobody can wipe over. But so he basically made up those 2 years of prayers or whatever when he was wiping over his socks in that way.
I had a similar thing about someone who left the Deen and came back.
Yeah. And you should always maintain the order. So when you're making up prayers, you should always do them Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, Isha, like that.
Mix and match.
Yeah. And you should make up the ones that are furthest back first, and then come forward in time, rather than doing the recent ones first and then going back the other way. Are there any questions about the making up of prayers?
Yeah. You know when you make them, do you do the loud ones out loud and the quiet ones out quiet, whatever time you do them?
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you make up the prayers in the way that they should be prayed.
Yeah, and if you if you have long hair and you didn't go down to the end of your hair, if your hair was in a bun, would you say you'd make up your prayer for those if you hadn't wiped your hair to the end?
I mean, some people would say you take the when it's excessive amount, you take the Shafi'i position, in order, because it's maybe 10 years of prayers or whatever somebody did that for. People do that often in Ramadan when people deliberately eat. For example, if somebody wasn't practicing their Deen and they ate throughout the day in Ramadan, even though they were an adult and it was incumbent upon them, in the Maliki position, they'd have to pay kafara for each of those days. But that would be a lot of requirement on somebody if it's for 10 years times 30, 300 kafara. Each one either fasting 2 consecutive months, or there's no slaves to free, or feeding 60 people. So sometimes in those positions, the fuqaha say you go outside the madhab to a position where it's easier from another madhab, just for those specific instances, but not as a general rule.
Okay.
So nudiba naflun mutlaqan. So this is the sunnah prayers we've talked about. And then we did the raghiba prayer. And then he did a little side note onto making up fard prayers. But then he's going back to his topic, which is non-obligatory prayers. He says, naflun, which is nafila prayers, are nudiba, are mandub, are recommended mutlaqan, absolutely. You don't need any particular time to pray. It's always recommended to do a prayer. You're always rewarded for praying in general. Praying at home, praying in a mosque, praying wherever you are, especially night prayers, getting up in the night and doing prayers in the night, that's nafila, strongly recommended. So in a general sense, prayers are recommended, but there are certain named nafila prayers that are more recommended than others, or certain times that are specified for nafila prayers that raise their rank. So he says, nudiba naflun mutlaqan, in absolute sense, nafila prayers are mandub, wa uqidat tahiyya, but the tahiyya is emphasized. Tahiyya means the tahiyyatul masjid, greeting the mosque. When you come into a mosque with the intention of being in that mosque, not simply passing through, and you are in wudu, and it is not the time when there is a fard prayer already being prayed, or the imam is not giving the khutbah, or it's not a time when it is disliked to do nafila prayers, then the first thing you should do before sitting down is to do 2 rakats of greeting the mosque. This is specific for the mosques of Allah. They are different from other houses, the houses of Allah. They have a special thing, and we want to emphasize that thing by giving them their due. Tahiyatul masjid. It's one of the most strong nafilas, to the extent that some people consider it a sunnah and some people even consider it wajibah. But you should never come into the mosque, even if there's a gathering of people learning knowledge or gathering of people reciting Quran or whatever. The first thing you should do if you are in wudu is to go and do these rakats. If you can't do it because you're not in wudu or you're or you come into the mosque in the time when it's disliked to do these prayers, you can do some dhikr of Allah subhanallah walhamdulillahi wa la ilaha illallah wallahu akbar wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, and say that a couple of times or 3 times with the intention of making it up. If you come in when the imam's already in the Fajr prayer, you don't have to lose the Tahiyyat al-Masjid. You can combine your intention of praying behind the imam with the Tahiyyat al-Masjid and get the reward for it. The only time you can't do anything is when you come into the Jummah and the imam is on the mimbar giving the khutbah. In fact, it's disliked to pray even when the imam is sitting on the mimbar before he started the khutbah. And it's forbidden once he starts the khutbah because listening to the khutbah is a fard. It's insat al-imam is a fard. So you're not allowed to do it. By the way, what if you remember a prayer that you've missed while you're sitting down in the Jummah? Say, oh my gosh, I didn't pray subh this morning. Yeah, might happen. If you are a person who people look to for knowledge, that they will see what you do and they will emulate you, then before you either should get up, leave the mosque and do it outside, or you should let the people right next to you know what you're doing. So they don't think that even though you're not meant to speak to people while there are things going on, it will create more of a fitna if somebody of knowledge is seen to do something that will cause other people to do it in that situation. وَأُكِدَتْ تَحِيَّةٌ ضُحَى Salat al-Duha. Shaykh Abdul Qadir rahimahullah used to emphasize Salat al-Duha a lot. The Duha prayer is the early morning prayer. It's basically a prayer that very few people do, which is why it's so emphasized. Basically, when you get up, you do Fajr, then a lot of people go back to bed after Fajr or they get involved in work. That time, early morning, when there are no other prayers, no fard prayers close by, it's a very difficult time to then have to do wudu and go and do a prayer. Salat al-Duha. That's sort of, it's between 2 and 8 rakats. Some people say the recommendation is to do 8 rakats, but that's early morning, sort of from the time when it becomes permissible to do nafila prayers, basically until dhuhr, but that early morning period is the best time for it. It's like if you go back to bed after Fajr, when you get up again. I mean, doing a couple of rakats.
Cool.
Yeah, well, it depends. It depends what time you get up again.
Yeah.
Depends what time Fajr is as well. Taraweeh, talat, and Taraweeh follows that. So another one that's a nafila, not a sunnah, but it's a nafila, is Salat al-Taraweeh, which is Qiyamul Layl, standing the night in Ramadan. It's actually more emphasized to do it at home if you can have the strength to do it. But Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu knew the strength of the greatest group of people, and he thought that there was grounds to having it in the mosque, because the majority of us, if we had to do it at home, would not hold fast to it the whole of Ramadan. So being able to do it in the mosque is a fantastic thing. It enables people who haven't got the himmah or the strength to do it at home to do it. The recommendation for us in the Malikiyya is 20 rakats, because that's what Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu established. It was actually increased to 36 by Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, the great Khalifa of the Umayyads, rahimahullah. But 20 is the general position on this. You say salam after every 2 rakats. There's no real recommendation of completing the Quran that is connected to it, but in the modern era, it is recommended because so many people lack the time to recite the Quran for themselves or to hear the whole Quran being recited. And in Ramadan is the month of Quran, which makes it a fantastic time for people to do that recitation. So it's after Isha, you can do some nafila rakats before it or not, but generally speaking, you go straight into the Taraweeh, 20 rakats, and then after that, you can do the witr, or you can do it as a group, the shafa and the witr, or you can leave that until the morning if you're having a secondary Qiyamul Layl tahajjud session before Fajr. If you arrive late, by the way, and the imam's done 1 rakat, and then he says as-salam, you've only caught the second part of one of these cycles of 2. You get up and you do another one quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, because usually the imam, that can be difficult in these mosques where the imam does sort of very short surahs for you to do that.
If you're doing it in your house on your own, Saturday, and you don't have the knowledge of the Quran, can you do the ones that you know and break it up into 20?
Of course, yeah, as I said, and you can. It's even permissible to carry a mushaf, so long as you start the prayer carrying the mushaf.
Yeah.
Not you're doing the prayer and then you think, oh, I can't remember what that bit is, and you reach out and grab a mushaf and open it. No, you start with the mushaf from the start of the prayer. So a couple more here. Nafila prayers that he mentions. Well, qabla witrin, before the witr, that's the shafa', the 2 rakats. Some people will almost say that they're sunnah. And there's a difference of opinion of whether you have, when you have time to do 2 rakats plus the subh plus the witr, whether you put Fajr there or you put the shafa' there, which one's more important? And people say, actually, the shafa' should be done because you can make up Fajr later. So it's considered to be a strong nafila, the shafa'. These 2 rakats that you do before the witr. It's recommended that you do sabbih isma in the first rakat of your shafa'. Qul ya ayyuhal kafirun in the second rakat of shafa'. And then in the rakat of witr, you do Qul huwallahu ahad, Qul a'udhu bi rabbil falaq, and Qul a'udhu bi rabbin nas. Those are recommendations for those particular prayers.
Yeah. So the shafa', the first rakat, because I remember the kafir what was it?
Sabbih isma.
Sabbih isma.
Surah Al-A'la. So, وَقَبْلَ وَتْرٍ, that's an emphasized nafila prayer. مِثْلَ الظُّهْرِ, in other words, like before dhuhr, asri, like before asr. 2 rakats or 4 rakats, it doesn't matter, but that time after the adhan of dhuhr, before the dhuhr prayer, is a recommended time to do nafila rakats. Similarly, after the adhan of asr, before the prayer of asr, recommended time to do nafila rakats. وَبَعْدَ مَغْرِبٍ, and after Maghrib is a recommended time to do nafila rak'ats. Some people used to do that right up until Isha. So after Maghrib includes actually before Isha. That whole period of time between Maghrib and Isha is a recommended time for doing nafila prayers. وَبَعْدَ الظُّهْرِ, and after Dhuhr. Immediately after Dhuhr. As for after Isha and before Subh, they already have sort of specified prayers that are indicated for those particular times, which is the shafa' and the witr and the fajr. But it's also fine to do extra nafila prayers before your shafa' and witr, or night prayers before your fajr. Okay, moving on to the next bit. One thing he doesn't mention here is the sajdas of recitation, which are also another strongly recommended. Some people say nafila, some people say sunnah. Form of prayer. It's not exactly prayer, but it's part of the prayer. Doing sajdas, when you go into them, you are praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we do those sajdas whenever we are in wudu and are specifically reciting for ibadah any of those ayats, or listening to somebody who's reciting those ayats. And we're actually listening, not just we're having to walk past and we hear it. We're actually there and listening, regardless of whether that person we're listening to is in the prayer or outside of a prayer. These sajdas are done within the prayer when you recite those things, although it's disliked if it's going to cause confusion to recite ayats that have these sajdas of prostration in the Fajr prayers, especially these silent ones, because you may be praying dhuhr with people, and then you recite that sajda, that ayah of sajda, and then you go down, and everybody who doesn't see you will go down into ruku' when you say Allahu Akbar. So you've got to be careful in those things. For us, there's 11 places. I'm not going to go through all of them, but the difference between, if you look in a mushaf, you will see these things signposted in the mushaf. There are ones that are signposted that we don't follow, and they are in the final mufassal, which I think is Surah Al-Hujurat to the end of the Quran, the final 7th portion of the Quran. None of those, I think there's 3 or 4 in those, are counted for us. We don't do sajdas for those ones, nor do we do the second one in Surah Al-Hajj that you find in some of the mushafs. So just quickly moving on, I'm going to do a little bit more here. The sujood as-sahw, forgetfulness. So sometimes when somebody makes a mistake in the prayer, you see them doing some sajdas at the end. When do you do these sajdas? He said, faslun, section, linaqsi sunnatin sahwan yusan. When a sunnah is missed out, sahwan, forgetfulness, in other words, the prostrations of forgetfulness, yusan, are required, become a sunnah, or something that you should do. Qabla salami, sajdatani, or sunan. So, yusannu qabla salam sajdatani. So it is a sunnah to do 2 sajdas, qabla salam, before the salam. Li naqsi sunnah, for the lack of a sunnah, or sunan, or the lack of sunnahs in the plural. We mentioned last time when we were going through the sunnahs of the prayer that this refers to 8 specific sunnahs. So he says here, in ukidat, if they are emphasized. If they are emphasized. So we mentioned before that they were the 2 scenes. The 2 scenes being the surah after the Fatiha, or the recitation you do other than the recitation of the Fatiha, and sir, reciting that recitation silently. If you do out loud, you have, in fact, you've added to the Quran, but if you've added. So that's 2 of the sunnahs. And the next ones he says are the 2 sheens, which are the 2 tashahuds. The first tashahud and the second tashahud. Obviously, some prayers only have 1 tashahud. But those 2 tashahuds are also considered to be sunnah mu'akkada. Each tashahud is a sunnah mu'akkada in its own right. Then the 2 jeems, which is sitting for the first tashahud, and jahar. Julus is a jeem, sitting, and jahar, out loud, is a jeem. Reciting out loud in the prayers where you should recite out loud. And then finally, he finishes with the 2 tars, which are the takbir, saying Allahu Akbar when you go between positions, apart from the takbir of al-ihram, which is a fard, and tasmi', which is saying Sami Allahu liman hamida. Tasmi', which is also a sunnah. But with these last 2, the 2 tars, you have to miss out 2 in order to be required to do. So that's why it says sunnah, and you have to miss out 2 of them minimum. If you miss out 1, you don't do any sajdas. Yeah. وَمَنْ يَزِدْ, if somebody adds, so that's if you, before the salam, if you miss out one of these sunnahs. If you add something, for example, a rak'at, or by mistake an extra sajda, or you're inadvertently eating something and adding something that's not part of the prayer, it doesn't break your prayer if you're doing it unaware, so long as when you become aware of it, you stop doing it. If you're any in those situations where you've added something to the prayer, or maybe you've done another rak'at completely because you weren't sure whether you'd done enough or so on, then you says here, yazid sahwan, if you add something sahwan out of forgetfulness, if you add it deliberately, your prayer is invalid. If you add anything to the prayer deliberately, you have invalidated your prayer, as we're going to come to. Anyway. Sahwan sajada ba'da salam. You do your sajda after the salam. Kada, similarly, وَالنَّقْصَ غَلِّبْ in warad. So if you actually add something to your prayer, you do an extra rak'at, but at the same time you maybe missed out something, like you missed out the middle tashahud. You've done missing things out and you've done addition. Which one do you give priority to? Which one should you?
Listen.
Yes, because something lacking from your prayer, something lacking from your prayer is considered to be of a greater importance than something missing. Because the time to make up the sajdas for things that are missing is much less. So it's a much more significant issue. So if you do both, you add and you subtract, then you do your sajda before the salam. But if you do it the other way around, it's fine, because there's a difference of opinion about this. So if you're not sure and you do it before, and you're not sure you do it after, you just make sure you do them. It's all right, your prayer is valid.
If it's different, you do 3 rak'ahs, and then you remember after the salam that you've only done 3 rak'ahs.
Yeah, so then you would have added an extra salam and So it will be an addition because you added a salam. وَاسْتَدْرِكِ الْقَبْلِيَّةِ, make the qabli right, rectify it, fix it. مَعْ قُرْبِ السَّلَامِ. So if you fail to do your sajdas before the salam, you can make it right مَعْ قُرْبِ السَّلَامِ, soon after saying Assalamu alaikum. If you, by soon after, by the way, he means that you haven't started another prayer, for example, or you haven't left the mosque, or you haven't got up and got involved in a conversation about something or other, like the weather or politics or whatever. You haven't completely just gone somewhere else. You're sitting there doing your dhikr after the prayer, even if it's for quite some time, or doing some recitation in the same sort of place afterwards. And then you remember, oh my gosh, I missed out on that. I've got to make it right. Then you can still do it. A long time has passed and you do any of those things, then you miss the chance and that's it. You can't do anything about it. Whether your prayer is valid or not then depends about how many sunnahs that you missed out, which we're going to come to later. وَاسْتَدْرِكْ الْبَعْدِيَّةِ, and make the ba'di right. In other words, fix it if you haven't done it. Correct it. وَلَوْ مِن بَعْدِ عَامٍ, even if a year has passed. So if you did 5 rakats by mistake, you like, for example, that situation where you said Assalamu alaikum, realized you'd only done 3, got up, did another rak'ah, and then finished and just said Assalamu alaikum, went on your way. You've added something to your prayer. And then you remember, oh my God, that time I added the salam. Wherever you are, you just go and do wudu, or if you're already in wudu, you just get down and do them. Find the qibla, do your 2 sajdas. Somebody might say, well, why are you doing that? You say, oh, I just remembered. So hopefully they won't think you're innovating some new type of worship. لغير مقتد يحمل هذين الإمام. This mistake that leads to you doing a sajda before the salam, or this mistake, this forgetfulness that leads to you doing a sajda after the salam, if you do it and you're praying behind an imam and he doesn't do it and his prayer is all right, he doesn't do any of these things. But say, for example, you miss out one of these things. You don't say the takbirs, for example, or whatever it is, behind the imam, or you do an extra position because you're not focusing and you out of forgetfulness, you add something to your prayer. The imam takes all of that from you. You don't have any consequences for it, as long as you didn't do it deliberately. If it's through forgetfulness, because it's the sajda to sahu of forgetfulness, then the imam carries it all and your prayer is perfectly valid. If on the flip side, if you come and join the prayer and the imam has made a mistake and you weren't actually part of the mistake, you still have to follow him in the sajdas. So, I mean, you would have to you can't do the sajda after the salam with him, by the way, because he's already left his prayer. You get up and finish your prayer and then you do it after the salam. لغير مقتد يحمل هذين الإمام وبطلت بعمد. So we've talked about that. If there are any questions about these sajda to sahu here? Yep.
I had a question about, so if one's doing the prostration of forgetfulness before the salam, and one does it after the tashahhud, should one not say the salat al-nabi, or should one say that before doing the 2 prostrations of forgetfulness?
Yeah, you should definitely say it before doing it, because that's still part of your prayer, and the prostrations are making your prayer right. So the sunnah is to do the salat al-nabi as part of your prayer. The prostrations of forgetfulness are a sort of a fix for your prayer. They're not part of the prayer in that way. Whether you do them in the prostrations of forgetfulness, because the prostrations of forgetfulness, the form is you do 2 sajdas and then you finish with a tashahhud and a salam. That's the general form of the prostrations of forgetfulness if you do it after the salam. If you do it before the salam, obviously the salam is still part of the original prayer. So the tashahhud that you do at the end of the 2 prostrations of forgetfulness, there's a difference of opinion about whether you just stop at the shahadatain or whether you add the salat al-nabi. It's fine either way.
Thank you, Shaykh.
وَبَطَلَتْ بِعَمْدِ نَفْخٍ وَكَلَامٍ. So what makes the prayer invalid? Deliberately blowing out. not necessarily sighing or something like, but, or, when people doing it as a way of attracting somebody's attention, or kids doing something, when they do that sort of, it's a form of speech in a way, but it's extraneous to the prayer. That doesn't mean that yawning breaks your prayer or anything like that, or sighing or groaning if you're in deep pain when it's involuntary, when you can't do anything about it. But this is deliberately blowing or semi-spitting in that way. Although sometimes, even when you've got spit and you need to spit it out, because it's like taking all of your attention, it's actually not impermissible. Yeah.
Well, mosquito.
No, you shouldn't be doing that. Not deliberately. If you're doing it deliberately, if you do it inadvertently without thinking, then that's different. Yeah. Kalam. So in fact, deliberately speaking breaks your prayer. Except لغير إصلاح, except for correcting the imam. And when you correct the imam, you should only correct him with as much as is needed to correct him. Best way to do that is say something like subhanallah, which that sort of word does not invalidate your prayer because it's something you can say in the prayer anyway. But you don't say, "Oh, mate, you missed out." You do as little as you can, and if he's not getting it, then you can do a little bit more. But it shouldn't become a whole conversation.
Second session.
By the way, sometimes it's obligatory on you to speak in the prayer, even though it's going to invalidate it. And that's, for example, if you see like a blind man about to walk off a cliff or something, you have to warn them. Or somebody's about to drown, and somebody's there who can help them or whatever. Yeah, absolutely. Or speaking without trying to correct somebody. By the way, if somebody says assalamu alaikum to you when you're praying, and it's obligatory on you to return the greeting, some people might say, well, this is still Arabic. Can you not say wa alaikum assalam? You can say that. You say salam in the prayer, but no, you're not allowed to. Yeah. You should return the greeting with a gesture. So you wave or nod the head or whatever, but that's enough to return the greeting. Still return the greeting in that way. It doesn't invalidate your prayer returning the greeting. وَبِالْمُشْخِلِ عَنْ فَرْضٍ, and something that distracts you from the obligations of the prayer. This is referring to needing to go to the toilet, basically. If you are praying and suddenly you have a desperate need to pee or to poo or something like that, and you're spending all of your energy holding it in because you want to make sure nothing emerges or whatever in that situation, and you're doing that so much that you actually forget where you are in the prayer, then your prayer is invalidated. If you're doing it just a little bit, but you can still know where you are in the prayer and you focus, it's recommended, as he says here, وَفِي الْوَقْتِ أَعِدْ إِذَا يُسَنْ, repeat it in the time if it is yusan, if it is sort of sunnah, if it's not the same level here, if it's you're having to hold it in, but it's not distracting you enough that you're forgetting where you are in the prayer. If you're praying needing to go to the toilet, it's recommended that you go to the toilet and then repeat the prayer in the time if you're still in the time. Not if it's just a tiny bit. But I'm saying if it's actually taking a lot of your focus from the prayer, then you shouldn't pray in that state. إِذَا يُسَنْ وَحَدَث, and happens, وَحَدَثٍ is talking about breaking your wudu, obviously, that invalidates your prayer. Anything that breaks your wudu also invalidates your prayer, hadath. وَالسَّهْوٍ, وَسَهْوِ زَيْدِ الْمِثْلِ. So if you inadvertently add to the prayer the same amount as the prayer. If you're praying subh and you pray 4 rakats for subh, forgetting where you are, You'll often find people, for example, if they're praying Dhuhr or Asr, and there's somebody who has these sorts of doubts, they're doing the tashahhud and they think, oh my God, is this the first or the second tashahhud? And then they add another 2. If you were to add another 4, your prayer would be invalid because you're completely distracted then. But if you just add 2, so you pray 6, your prayer is valid, so long as you do it through forgetfulness. If you know you've prayed 4 and pray another 2, your prayer is invalid. Similarly with subh, if you pray, you're praying subh, and you, for example, you're in the tashahhud, and you think, oh my God, I think I might have only prayed 1 rakat. If you get up and then pray another 2 because you're coming down again and think, oh, have I done? Then your prayer will be invalid because you've doubled. With Maghrib, it's 4 rakats, obviously, because you normally do it in cycles of 2. Because you would be unsure whether you've done a certain number of rakats. But I suppose it's conceivable you could do 5 for Maghrib. Not sure where you are. If you do 5, your prayer would be valid. Deliberately, not even deliberately, involuntarily laughing out loud. Sometimes you're praying, and a kid walks past you and makes a funny face at you or whatever, especially if you're praying at home. Or your consciousness remembers something that's quite amusing, or somebody says something that just happens to enter into your hearing, and you suddenly can't help but sort of laugh. If you can control that laugh and it doesn't become a sound, then it doesn't invalidate your prayer. As soon as you have the sound of laughter emerge from you, your prayer is invalidated. If you just smile, even though you're distracted, your prayer is still valid. وَعَمْدِ شُرْبٍ أَكْلٍ, and deliberately eating and drinking. As I said, if you do it without thinking, for example, you forget you've got bubble gum in your mouth or something, and you're just praying without even noticing it, that doesn't invalidate your prayer. But the moment you are aware of it, you need to stop. وَسَجْدَةٍ, and adding a sajda deliberately to your prayer. So you're thinking, I know, I'm feeling quite, good today. I think I'll get closer to Allah. I think I'll add an extra sajda. So I'm doing 3 instead of 2. Or, well, I don't know why, 4 rakats is not enough for dhuhr. I'll do a 5th. Or, ruku, I quite like that kusuf prayer. I think I'll add a 2nd ruku or whatever. Anything like that invalidates your prayer. You've changed something that has specific dimensions and you've altered them. Deliberately throwing up. Involuntary, when you can't control it, so long as you don't deliberately then swallow it back, then your prayer wouldn't necessarily be invalidated by something like that coming up. But then you would have to sort of somehow be able to rid yourself of it because it might be impure. It wouldn't. وَذِكْرِ فَرْضٍ, and remembering a fard, أَقَلَّ مِنْ سِتٍّ, that is less than 6 fards. Remembering a fard prayer that you've missed, that is 5 or less fard prayers. We've already talked about that. كَذِكْرِ بَعْضِ, like remembering a portion of a fard prayer. So you're doing Asr, and suddenly you remember, oh my gosh, I only prayed 3 rakats for dhuhr. And you become absolutely certain of that. Then the prayer of the Asr that you're in is invalid. Because it's the same as remembering a prayer. If you remember missing out a portion of a prayer, that prayer is invalid. Okay, so the next bit is a little bit separate, so we'll leave it there, inshallah. It's getting quite late. Are there any questions about that? Because we're going to... Yep.
Yeah, can I ask 2 questions? Number 1, if you're going to, can you do a tahil al-masjid in Eid prayer? Especially if you can't see if the imam's there. But if they're doing all that, they're doing...
Depends where the Eid prayer is being prayed. If it's in the mosque...
In the masjid.
If it's in the mosque, then yes, you can. If the imam's not out there, of course, it's a mosque.
Oh, right. I didn't. Okay. For some reason, I thought you couldn't. And also, the internet cut out when you were saying about. Did you say you can carry a mushaf if you do tarawih at home?
Yeah.
Did you say you could? Okay.
Yes, absolutely. It's mentioned in the Mudawwana, in fact, about carrying a mushaf, so long as you start the prayer with the mushaf holding it.
And what do you do when you go down? You just hold it in your right hand and
yeah, you keep it in your right hand, or maybe you close it and keep it there, or maybe put it on the side, something next to it. But so long as it's something that you've started the prayer with, and it's not something that you've doing extraneous to the prayer.
Yeah. Jazakallah khair.
Any other questions before we finish? The next bit is talking about making things right, or it might be worth actually doing one more line, because that refers to what we were doing, and that is, if you miss 3 sunnahs and then do not make it right with the sajdas, either before the salam. So he says, وَفَوْتِ قَبْلِيٍ, missing the qabli, the 2 sajdas that you do before the salam, ثَلَاثَ سُنَنِ, on account of 3 sunnahs being missed, بِفَصْلِ مَسْجِدٍ, having left the mosque already, كَتُولِ الزَّمَنِ, like a long time having passed, that invalidates your prayer. That makes your prayer invalid. That's if you forget 3 sunnahs. So forgetting the surah after the Fatiha, is that 1 sunnah, or how many sunnahs is this? Because there's sir and jahr, silently and out loud. That's also a sunnah. So whether you do it silently or whether you do it out loud is a sunnah for the surah as well as for the Fatiha. So when you miss out the surah, you miss out the surah itself, which is a sunnah. You miss out doing it silently if it's dhuhr. And you miss out standing for the surah, which is not an emphasized sunnah, but it is a sunnah, because this here is talking about 3 sunnahs in general. If you miss out 3 sunnahs, and one of them is one of these types, or at least one of them is one of these emphasized sunnahs, then you have to make your prayer right. And if you don't, your prayer is invalidated. So missing out the surah is 3 sunnahs in one. Missing out the middle tashahhud is 3 sunnahs in one. The sitting for the middle tashahhud, the tashahhud, and the wording of the tashahhud, which is a separate sunnah in itself. So you really have to make sure that you make your prayers right when you miss out sunnahs. It's a big deal, because quite often that thing you thought was a single sunnah was in fact comprised of a number of sunnahs. Anyway, we'll finish there, inshallah. Unless there's any more questions. بسم وبركاته بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد عبدك ورسولك النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Thank you all very much for coming, and see you next week, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.